Assalamu alaikum all. I hope you're all refreshed after that lunch and ready to start again. So for this, we will be doing 3 speakers for this topic. Building enduring endowments, governance, growth, and engagement. So they'll each present, and then you'll have a chance at the end for all of them to come up here and do a Q&A. So they'll walk us through the essential pillars of building and sustaining a strong endowment. We'll explore governance, investment strategy, and donor engagement, the 3 components that determine whether an endowment can grow responsibly and serve its community for generations. These 3 experts will each deliver focused presentations, and then we'll do the Q&A. So our first presenter, we will begin with Owaiz M, Dadabhoy, who is the Senior Vice President of the Mana Mutual Fund and a leading expert in the value-based Sharia-compliant asset management. He will open the session by exploring how to align investment strategy with mission. So please welcome to the stage Owaiz M, Dadabhoy.
And where's the presentation? I'm looking there. Okay, perfect. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. So I think Dr. Yaqub Mirza got us started on a good note this morning because he gave his own life experiences and what he's done, and we saw how much good it can do. And that's what we're all trying to get to. And I was talking on our table over there on the side that eventually the conversation at a conference like this will be about how can we use all the dollars that are there in the endowments, right? Because the reality is there's really good news. And I think the other 2 speakers will mention something very similar, that dozens and dozens of organizations have opened endowment accounts already. So alhamdulillah, that's a big thing and a great thing. It's just that each of them needs a champion, right? Somebody that's going to actually make this happen and go raise the money. You need the right people there. So my presentation will talk a little bit about, how do we build these endowments? How do we build for the future? And so I'll talk about these areas here. I have a very short amount of time given the number of slides, so I'm going to rush through some of it, unfortunately, but I'll try to stop at those areas that are most relevant, inshallah. So the endowment is a fund established by a donor, right? So a donor comes to you and says, I want to endow your organization. You then create the account. And as it's already been mentioned, it's going to be perpetual. It's going to be ongoing. We're not going to use that $10,000 gift that they gave you. You're going to invest it in some way. And then what you find is that organizations want to buy properties typically. Even individuals want to buy properties. But if you're just starting off as an individual or organization, oftentimes the best way to get started is through mutual fund or ETF investing, because it only takes you hundreds of dollars instead of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then eventually you can build up to a large enough amount where you can go buy that property and, do the things that you want to with it, inshallah. There's 2 types, and we get into this a lot with organizations that want to start an endowment. One is a true endowment where you're going to have a separate 501c3, and it's going to help or assist or basically eventually fund the operations of the original organization. That's a true endowment. You're going to have a separate board, all the things that we'll talk about in a little bit. But for some organizations, they'll never get started if we tell them to go start a true endowment with a separate 501c3. So what they end up doing is they start off with what's called a quasi-endowment, which is, hey, under our current masjid structure, let's say that we're going to start an endowment. Let's have a corporate resolution. Let's come up with some ideas about what this is going to be, what the structure is going to be. Let's at least get it started. And then once they get the wind under their sails, then they can go and open up a true endowment and transfer the funds there. So that's just a little bit of how you can get this started. We've heard about today, we need a blueprint. And I want to talk to whoever's mentioned blueprint today. I'd like to talk to you afterwards because, there are some things that are already out there, but we'd like to understand what you mean by blueprint. To those of us in the industry, I'm looking at Fatima and others here, opening up an endowment is not the most difficult thing in the world. It's like opening up a bank account, right? But what you're going to do underneath of it, once you really get going, that's the important part. And so, I'm going to give you some of the basics, and then the next speaker will give you some of the specifics, inshallah. An endowment can own property, it can own art, it can own... There was one that we managed after about 2 years after they opened up the endowment. They had about 500,000, and one of their donors said they want to transfer their house to them, right? A second house. So they were able to do that. The house was in the Midwest somewhere. It was like 250,000. They eventually sold it and invested it. So you can get many different things in it. Any endowment that you open as an investment, you really should have a brokerage account that's tied to it where you can accept donated shares of mutual funds or ETFs or stocks. And what you'll find is that once you offer that opportunity, your donations will significantly increase by the people that have already been giving you money, because of the benefit in transferring shares versus just writing a check to you. And as already mentioned, once the money goes in there, it's going to be perpetual, it's irrevocable, and that's a good thing. That's what we want. There's been some very highly successful endowments in America, and typically they were started a few years ago, and they really put a lot of emphasis in it. So I'll give you a quick example just to break this up a little bit. We started up an endowment for a masjid in New Jersey. We were talking about it earlier today. And they raise about $100,000 a year in their annual event. Not a lot, but they have a beautiful masjid, right? And they're doing very well, but they only raise $100,000 a year to run their masjid. And so they said, look, we want to start this endowment. Can you come give a talk? So we talked about it at their annual event. And they said, whatever we collect here, we're going to put into the endowment. And then the 100,000 that we need to run the masjid, we'll collect that through Jummah collections and, some other odd events that we'll do. But all of this money is going to go into the endowment. And just remember the numbers I gave you. So 100,000 is what they collected the first year. And every year since that, it's been just north of $100,000. And, they thought they would be at about 400 or so thousand. After 4 years, they're at about 700,000. So I'm going to show you a graph at the end about how this money can grow. But that's a real life example. And that's just a regular you and me type of masjid in your local community. Doesn't even raise a lot of money, but now they've got 700,000 in endowment. And eventually, when they get to the $5 million, the $10 million mark, they can stop having to raise money and instead do more in the way of programming, right? That's the idea of these endowments. What are the requirements? Very short piece on this because there's more that's going to be coming. A waqf has a legal ownership of the asset. It's going to be a permanent object like real estate or, artwork or something like that. And it has to have a clear purpose and has to promote the general welfare. So in my local area, we have a masjid that I'm part of, and we started up an endowment. And the first order of business was to transfer our property, the actual masjid, it's on 4 acres, into this endowment, just like what NEAT does, right? So it's transferred there. And now the second order of business is to raise money and to be able to have a large enough amount of money to support the operations of the masjid. So that new organization called the Yorba Linda Muslim Community Endowment is supporting the actual masjid, the masjid in Yorba Linda. So whatever is going to happen, right, they're going to take care of the asset. They're going to raise the money for the endowment with our help a little bit. And then the eventual amount that comes out of the return will benefit the masjid. All right. When is the right time to start an endowment? When I first started talking about this, it was probably over a dozen years ago. I'd come back from a trip to India. My brother was getting married all the way in India on an island, right? So we went to Madras and then we had to fly to the island, Andaman Islands. And when we came back, we did a tour for like 5 weeks and my parents were with me. My mother, who says we're from Pakistan, she showed me a line of streets with her maiden name on it. So obviously she was originally from India, but she says we're Pakistani. And they all had her name on, these businesses had her maiden name on it because about 70 years ago, they started a waqf. And so all these businesses are running, mashallah, still today. And the income that's derived supports the widows and, anyone else in need from that particular family. So that's when I got my first real life experience that this is something important. So, a few years after that, I started working on this as well. And what I found is that some masjids, some organizations, they like the idea of an endowment, but they don't really know what to do with it. So it is not the right time for them. So what is the right time? If you have a board that's been around for a while, if you've had a change in the board. Now, why is a change in the board important? Because it shows that you can survive after the founders are no longer there, right? That you have people that are interested in this organization and it's still running over 5 years, 10, 20, even with board position changes. So that's a good thing. And then you want to be stable, financially with the organization before you start up a new true endowment, because you're not even able to take care of your first one. How are you going to start an endowment, right? Now, you could start the endowment, but it's going to sputter. So one of the first ones, it was in either New York or New Jersey. I was in the area. I was meeting with this masjid, and they started it with $20,000, but I could tell that they didn't really have a real idea of what is going to take to make this work. And it didn't grow very well. It took a long, long time before the right people came, probably 5 or 6 years before they collected anything. So they knew the idea of the endowment, but they didn't know how to move forward, even with guidance on that. So that's part of it is, having the right people, capacity, able to raise funds. And the people that you're going to go to for your endowment are the same people that are already assisting you with your nonprofit, with your masjid. Those are the same people. And so I'll give you a quick example at our masjid. We do one fundraiser a year during Ramadan, and we collect our deal with the masjid is, if we collect all that we need, we won't do any fundraisers during the year because they don't like them, right? So we collect it, alhamdulillah. And at the end, I just said, we do have an endowment that's starting up. This was a few years ago. We have an endowment starting up, and this is what an endowment is. And I just left it at that. And so somebody that had already donated, he came to me afterwards and said, I'll write a $10,000 check because like the idea of it, right? So, once you put it out there, like Sheikh Musa was saying, he did 7 khutbahs on endowments before people started to understand. And so it does take a lot of education to help people to understand what the value is, but the same people that will donate to you for your operational costs will donate to you for your endowment. I've seen that myself. And then eventually, obviously, you're going to have to hire people to manage it, to raise funds, to actually make this something sustainable. And so what I think Fatima is going to talk about is, the governing piece of this, right? So you want to have a document that states what this is. There was one endowment that I spoke to. They had changed boards over time, and they said, we have this endowment. We have no idea what it's supposed to be about, though. We don't know what they intended because we can't find a single document about it, but they know it's an endowment, and it wasn't very big, so it wasn't a big issue. So we just talked about, well, let's make it a true, a proper endowment that this is going to work for your community. But you don't want to be in that situation where you have you as a board member, as a leader, you go out there, you start an endowment, and then, as we all move on to the next thing, the people that come after us have no idea what we even set up, right? So you want to have the proper documents there. You want to have a 501c3 to make it a true endowment, because eventually you're going to make this a $5 million, a $10 million endowment, inshallah, or whatever your specific needs are. And then you want to have a written investment policy. So again, as you transition from one person, one board to another, they know what you're trying to do. There's one endowment they were working with, and they want to put into all of their money into alternatives. They're just starting now, and they want to put it into alternatives, right? But they don't really understand it, but they want to move forward with it. So if they had a policy statement that says, 90% of our money is going to be in these types of investments that are, more you have more historical data on them versus something that you're taking a much bigger risk on, they would have been protected against that, right? Against one person that really likes alternatives and doesn't want to do any of the standard type of investing. And then separate your governance duties with the different groups. The beauty of having a true endowment versus a quasi one, which is just part of your regular organization, is that if you have a board of 5 or 7 people, once you start up a new organization and you have a board there with 5 to 7 people, you just doubled the amount of human capital that you have, right? Instead of 5 or 7 board members working for the cause, you now have 10 to 14 working for the same cause. One for the masjid, one for the endowment, or one for your nonprofit, one for the endowment. So everyone now is working towards the same goals, inshallah. Eventually what you want to do, especially if you're a nonprofit relief organization, I think most of them in the room probably already do this, is you want to have your audited financials every year. And what you'll find is if you're not receiving any type of grants right now, it's not really a question. But there's certain donors that will come to you and say, show me your audited financials. They think that everyone should have it. And if they're going to give you a significant amount of money, they need you to do that. It doesn't cost, a tremendous amount of money. You do it at the same time you fire a 990, but it's going to give you something of real value because it's transparency. It's easy for someone that wants to donate a large amount of money to be able to see your audited financials. So at some point you need to get to that point. It's not difficult to do to introduce annual audits. You want to hire from the outside. You can't do all the work on your own, right? You can have you have somebody on your team that's a treasurer. They know how to do taxes for for individuals, but now you're having them do it for an organization. The organization is growing. You really want to take a risk of that? It doesn't cost a lot of money to hire somebody with real understanding of nonprofits. And then finally, obviously you want to have, and my time's up and it's red. Sorry. Okay, let me just finish up here then. Obviously the Sharia and the faith compliance. Let me just see if I have anything else. So these are the key stakeholders. I'm just going to wrap it up now. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but you can take a snapshot or kind of think about who needs to be a part of this and what to look out for. This was something I added just for you all, which is underqualified or inactive trustees. They're on your board, but they're not really helping you. They're kind of like dead weight, and your endowment will not grow with them on the team. So, you consider your team like a bus, and who's on that bus is going to be very important. And if there's one straggler not doing anything, or there's 5 stragglers, it's time to make a change, right? Let's not play nice all the time. We can do it in a nice way, but we got to make a change. So this is super important to have the right team on an endowment. And the one that we have in our local area for the masjid, we've already had to switch the board one time. Like, we can't go do that for them because they're their own board. But we've had that conversation and we said, you're not the right people. We thought you were. We got the property into the endowment. You did great, but now you're not able to raise funds, right? And you don't know about the governance piece. So it's time to one by one step off and bring in the right people. And some people will just not fundraise, right? They will not hustle. They will not share their own contacts. Hey, let's each one of the board members have a backyard dinner to raise money, but they're not going to do it. They don't introduce anyone to it. They're just kind of there at the meeting. So we want to, eventually move them off. The honorary boards just don't work, right? Especially because there's no accountability. Last slide. This is kind of patterned after the New Jersey one that I was mentioning, the masjid. They started with 100,000. After 5 years, this is not their numbers, but it's pretty much right on. This is at an 8% average rate of return, right? You can make your rate of return what you want based on what your investment is. But at 8% annual return after 5 years, it grows to $733,000 by putting in $100,000 a year. But the beautiful thing is, in 30 years, which we can't really visualize right now, it would be $12 million just at $100,000 a year. Now, we were talking on my table that what if this organization would have started their endowment 50 years ago, right? Well, if we're starting ours now and you're thinking, well, you're telling me to look 30 years from now, I don't want to do that. Let's do that anyway, right? And if you can get to the larger numbers beforehand, that's great. But this is only $100,000 a year. Many of the organizations are able to raise a lot more than that. And one other key tip I would give you is, if you don't think you can raise that much money right now, but you know that you need to start an endowment, take a portion of your annual fundraising, maybe it's 5%, 10%, and start putting that into your endowment. And be transparent. Tell people what it is. And you will get certain people that will increase their donation because they want to be a part of that Sadaqah Jariyah and the difference that this is going to make in people's lives. That's all I have the time for today. I actually took extra time. Sorry, Fatima and Brother Salah, for taking your time. But hopefully you'll keep them with their time as well, inshallah. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.